What's up, everyone? Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. Excited to be back today with another client interview for you guys. Today, I'm really excited to have Jack on with us. Jack is one of our amazing students who just finished going through actually the full-time recruiting process. We've been doing a lot of these interviews for summer internships, but Jack just went through the full-time recruiting process for he's graduating class of 2023, and we're recording this as of mid-April, which is, I guess, about a month before graduation. We've been working with them for about, 3.5 months, I guess. Yeah, you've only been with us for about 3.5 months. So, so it's been very fast paced. He's been busy as hell, as I'm sure he'll tell you. And recently it's all paid off with a great offer. And so just want to get him come on here and talk to you guys about his journey. I know a lot of students we talk to find themselves in kind of like a similar timeline or similar situation as Jack. And so, I want to get him to come on here, give you guys some motivation and inspiration on just, what's possible, right? So Jack, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. And if you don't mind, just kicking things off for us by introducing yourself real quick, just like, give our audience a sense of kind of like what your profile is and kind of like what your situation was coming in.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, first off, Sam, I'd like to just say, thanks for having me on today. I definitely know you're super busy, so I'm happy to help out in any way. So, yeah, going with that. Yeah. So I basically went to a non-target school, and I joined Wall Street Mastermind in around January of my senior year. So I was definitely super late to the game. I didn't really have any very relevant experience specific to investment banking. I had a couple internships at an Anheuser-Busch distributor, and that was in finance, but it wasn't super specific to IB. And then after my junior year, I was in wealth management, and so obviously that isn't super specific. So I was kind of coming in with pretty much no relevant experience, non-target school, and obviously very late to the game. And so I was kind of in a difficult spot for sure. And yeah, once I joined, I was, the first month was super busy with, doing all the modules and stuff like that. And then, after that, all the networking and applying and then preparing for interviews. And so, yeah, my schedule was pretty much booked out from 9 a.m. to midnight, pretty much every day. It was definitely a grind, but here I am now with an offer. So it definitely paid off. And once again, appreciate all the support I got from, you and the rest of the team.
That's awesome, man. There are a lot of things I want to ask you based on what you just said, but before we kind of dive into all that, can we kind of tell people like what was the final outcome, I guess? Like after grinding it out, 9 a.m. to midnight, which is honestly, we'll dive more into that, but I think a lot of people are not up for that grind, right? Like they want the result, but they're not up for the grind.
Yep.
I
Yep.
mean, like that's 15 hours a day, every day, right?
Mhm.
But what was the end result? I guess like where are you going? What was the offer that you got?
Yeah. Yeah. So I just got an offer. This is, 3 days ago. And so got an offer from, regional. I'd say it's more of a middle market firm than anything. And it's actually kind of a great story with them. So, one of the guys that, reached back out to me, basically, I was networking with him, about a month ago. And then obviously, they do all their recruiting back in, September, like most banks. And then about 2 weeks ago, he reached back out and said, "Hey, Jack, we're actually looking for more analysts. It might make sense for you to hop on a call with one of our directors." And so I hopped on a call with him, and then went in for a super day that next week. And then after that, the next day, I hopped on a couple calls with two of the founders that weren't there in the office, and then I got an offer, right after those calls. So I'm super happy about it. The fit was great, and it was exactly what I was looking for. So, it's just kind of goes to show how important all aspects of the recruiting process are, and specifically networking.
Yeah, absolutely. When you said just a little bit more on that point, when you said like if the fit was great and it's exactly what you were looking for, like what were some of the things that were really important to you and in terms of like the
Yeah.
offer that you got?
Yeah, for sure. So, first I definitely wanted, more of a smaller team to be working with. And, that kind of sounded the wealth management internship was, for Morgan Stanley. So obviously that was a, large institution I was working for. And then,
Mm.
I had the search fund internship, and then, I really liked that aspect, working on a, smaller team. So that was definitely something I'm looking for. And then also kind of wanted, a middle market bank, and that kind of stemmed from, at the Anheuser-Busch distributor, we were a middle market company, and then at Morgan Stanley, most of our clients were, business owners. And so, yeah, I just really enjoyed working with these middle market, C-suite and owners, and that's definitely things I was looking for. And then kind of the location was great for me too. I wanted something in the Midwest, and obviously it's in one of the financial cities in the Midwest. So yeah, those were probably the top three reasons of what I was exactly looking for.
That's awesome, man. It's always great when the offer you get like checks all the boxes, because that doesn't, honestly, that's not always the case. And a lot of times
Hmm.
with the way recruiting shakes out, it's like a lot of times you kind of have to take the first offer that you get, and even if
Hmm.
it doesn't check all the boxes, like it's so hard to get even just one offer.
Right.
Most of the time, people just will compromise on some of these things a little bit if it means that they have a job, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Definitely.
Um, so let's dive a little bit into kind of like the process of how you got here, right? So
Hmm.
like you said, you joined Wall Street Mastermind like early January of senior
Yep.
year. It was like right after New Year's, I think. And
Yep.
that was obviously extremely late because I think like your final semester had just started, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
prior to that, like had you like at what point did you realize you want to do investment banking? And then from
Right.
the point you realized it until you joined, like was joining a program pretty much like something you did like immediately after, or like was there a period of time in between where you were kind of already, trying to figure things out on your own? And if so, like
Hmm.
what were some of the things you were already doing on your own? Like what were the resources you were relying on? And can you talk about that a little bit?
Yep.
Like just your pre Wall Street Mastermind days of recruiting for
Yeah.
IB.
Yeah, for sure. So, starting off, I kind of realized I wanted to get into IB pretty much the beginning of my first semester. So around September, I realized I wanted to get into IB, and then yeah, I was doing mostly, applying, just by myself. The resources I was using was kind of just anything I could find online. Really, I don't think I was doing the great due diligence at all. My resume wasn't great. Obviously, I didn't have a lot of relevant experience, and so I probably applied to, I don't know, 50 to 100 places during my first semester. I got
Wow.
one interview, and then obviously didn't get an offer with them, and that process kind of went to mid December ish. And it was kind of at that point where I realized I needed to take a different approach, and that was kind of when I heard of Wall Street Mastermind. And so I kind of dove in a little bit into what you guys do, and it was definitely something that I was looking forward to attain an offer.
Gotcha. So, I feel like it sounds like in that short period of time, like from September to October, sounds like you were already kind of like grinding a lot then, because you submitted like 50
Oh
to
yeah.
100 applications. Sounds like
Yep.
the job you ended up eventually getting, the networking for that actually was done way back in September when you first realized you wanted to do banking, right?
Well, the network. See, that was the other thing, is I was kind of going about recruiting, incorrectly. I wasn't doing a lot of networking back in September. I was pretty much just throwing out applications.
Hmm.
And the guy who reached back out from the bank that I got the offer from, that was from networking in I think it was probably like February of this year.
Okay, so you networked with them in February. Got it.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So first
Oh, they
semester I
did their
wasn't really doing.
recruiting. They initially did their recruiting back in
Yes,
September.
yes,
Got it. I
yes,
misheard you
exactly.
earlier. Okay. They finished
Yeah,
recruiting when you had just decided you wanted to do banking. So obviously it was like too
yes,
late. And then you networked with him
yes,
in
yep,
February, and then he came back in
yep,
April, I guess.
yep, yep, yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah. So first semester I wasn't doing any networking at all. I mean, I hopped on a couple calls, but definitely wasn't to the extent of the networking I did over the past 3 months.
Yeah. Gotcha. And obviously you mentioned you go to a non-target school, so like, were there any resources on campus that you could rely on to just like kind of guide you through the process, or like those first few months? Obviously, you were working hard still, but is it like
Mhm.
you're just kind of like in the dark trying to figure everything out on the fly, or like what is
Yeah.
that process like? I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So I was pretty much in the dark, and I was, very naive in terms of, how competitive IB was back in first semester. Now we do have a banking club here at my school, but they do all their interviews for that. It's pretty much only open for freshmen and first semester sophomores. So
Mhm.
obviously that was out for me because I realized I wanted to get into banking my senior year. But besides that, I mean, the resources weren't great. I mean, obviously there are a good amount of, bankers that, come out of my school, and those were pretty much who I was targeting over the past couple months. But, besides that, wasn't really utilizing too many resources. We didn't really have too many at the school.
Gotcha. Okay. That all makes sense. So then you said at some point you kind of heard about Wall Street Mastermind and then you started diving a
Hmm.
little bit into what we did. Like,
Hmm.
what was it that made you want to work with us after looking into everything? Because I feel like I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes at the time.
Hmm.
I feel like a lot of people, if one, they're starting so late, and two, they've been kind of grinding for 3 months straight and submitted 50 to 100 applications and only gotten one interview. I think a
Hmm.
lot of people's reaction in that situation would be like, oh, I'm so discouraged and this is probably not for me. And they wouldn't have the confidence to like invest into a program like this to like keep going,
Hmm.
right? And then so like what was your
Yeah.
mentality? And also like walk us through the decision making process of like, hey, yeah, like I'm gonna invest in this program. I'm gonna like you in my mind, you basically went all in on this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like what made you come to that decision, I guess?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, a big part of my decision was, and you talk about this in your modules, is, remembering your why. Why do you want this? And, how hard are you going to work for this? Work ethic is definitely something I pride myself on. And I think, it's really important for, IB specifically. And so,
Mhm.
this was something that, I really wanted. And then, once I came across you guys, one of a few things that kind of, stood out to me was, first I looked at kind of, the client interviews and, words from, past clients who got offers. That was definitely super helpful. And also kind of just like how well-rounded the program is, obviously. I mean, you know, it's recruiting, especially for IB. It's not just, you do this one thing. It's, it's the networking, the behavior questions, the technical questions. It all comes together to get to the final outcome, and that was something that really stood out to me because obviously, like I said, I was kind of just throwing out applications. I didn't really know how the process worked and how competitive it was and things like that. And so the program is super well rounded, and it definitely stood out to me. And then in terms of the investment in the program, it was definitely something I had to think about at least for a few days. But at this point, like I said, I was super committed, and I liked kind of the platform and things like that. And at the time, it made sense for me making the investment because obviously IB is definitely very well paying, and so the investment you make in the program is pretty minute in terms of the what you'll be making, even right out of college. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, for sure. What did you end up investing this on your own, or did your parents help you with it, or did you have to like basically did you have to have a conversation with them about why you want to join this
Hmm.
program? And like if so, like how is that conversation? Because we find that a lot of times when students talk to their parents about this, it ends up being kind of a tough conversation because the students are the ones that are going through the process themselves and they know how hard it is. But the
Hmm.
parents have never done investment banking before or have never recruited for anything like investment banking before. And it's hard for them to visualize like why something like this even exists or is necessary, right? Did you
Yeah.
run into that at all? And if so, like, how did you kind of convince them, I guess?
Yeah, it's great that you bring that up because actually both my parents are pharmacists actually, and they worked at one company throughout their whole career, and so definitely new to the business world, and obviously they had no idea how competitive banking is, and kind of the process that you have to go through.
Yeah.
They when they were back in college, they went to one interview and showed their transcript, and they brought them on board. So that's definitely a lot different between other careers. And so yeah, this was definitely a challenging talk that I had to have with my parents, just because they just didn't really know a whole lot about banking and other high finance roles. And so I kind of had them, do some more digging and research on their own, as well as, I talked to them, just talked about, how competitive it is, and how, this is going through this program is going to give me, that competitive advantage to get an offer. And, I talked to them about my why and, my long-term career aspirations and things like that.
Mm,
But, they were definitely a little hesitant at first. And then they definitely did some digging into the program and other research, and at the end of the day we agreed that this was kind of the best move for us. And then in terms of paying for the program, we split it up 50-50 right off the bat. So I was putting 50% in, and then basically told them that I'd pay them back the other 50%, during my first year of working. So
mm.
yeah, I had some help from them, but definitely paying them back within this next year. So
That's
yeah.
that's awesome. I mean, a couple of things I took away from that is one, it sounds like you and your parents have like, a good healthy relationship where obviously it's like it's natural for parents to have concerns about something that they don't really understand, right? Or they don't
Mhm.
understand why it's needed, and it's very different from their own experience. But it sounds like you guys were able to have that conversation where they heard you out, they actually listened to what you were going through, and why you
Mhm.
want to do this and why it's important to you, and then at the same time they gave you the support that you were asking for without kind of like taking that ownership and responsibility away from you, whereas
Mhm.
like you still had a ton of skin in the game, like you were putting
Mhm.
in your own money, and not just upfront but
Mhm.
also you were going to pay them back for the rest. And we see this time and time again, but because like a lot of our students, their parents pay for the program, but like some of our students, they end up paying for the program themselves. And when you actually look at the data in terms of like who typically works the hardest in the program and who typically like gets better results in the program, is like take a wild guess in terms of like which
Yeah.
side is going to work harder and get better results,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
um,
exactly. Yeah. So it's great you bring that up because it was actually my idea to pay the 50% upfront and then pay them back, and they actually even offered to have me just pay for 50 and then them pay for the other 50. But I definitely knew that this was going to be helpful for me because I definitely had skin in the game, and I wanted to work my butt off to get that offer and be able to pay them back eventually. So
yeah, that's awesome, man. So let's talk about like after you came in then, because okay, you come in, it's early January, you're like, I'm graduating in 4.5 months, I don't have a lot of time. And so obviously I think like the sense of urgency was there. But
mhm,
going back to something that you said earlier, you basically were fully booked out from like 9 a.m. to midnight every day was what you said, right?
mhm.
Is that just
Yep.
like Monday to Friday? Is that including weekends or like what was like walk us through kind of like what your last 3.5 months look like
Yeah.
what were you doing with all that time? Because I
Mhm.
mean, even if it's only Monday to Friday, that's 75 hours a week. If
Yeah.
you include
Yeah.
weekends, then it's even more. So it's basically banking hours, right? So like,
Yeah. Yeah.
well, walk us through what that was like and what you were doing.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll kind of start right, when I joined. Obviously, I knew I was super late to the game, and so I knew that it was time was of the essence. So right when I started, I think I completed all the modules within, I want to say, within the first month. And so during winter break, I spent all my time going through the modules. I was like, how many hours all the modules?
If you went through all the modules, you probably spent like, I want to say 45 to 50 hours probably.
Yeah, yeah, and so that's just the, watching them, and then you have to, make your
Yeah.
resume, cover letter, and LinkedIn, and get your search fund, and work on your behavioral doc. So, I did all of that within the first month, and so that was kind of my focus for the month of January, and then after that, that was kind of when school started up again, and so I wasn't taking a crazy hard semester. I'd say probably close to 30 of those hours were working on school, and then 10 hours ish a week was working at the search fund, and then I was doing some tutoring too, and then specific to recruiting, I'd say probably it was pretty much a full-time job. I'd say 40-ish hours a week, definitely more at other times. But after I finished all the modules, that was kind of when I, really ramped up the networking. So I'd say I probably reached out to, I don't know, close to 200, 300 people, within a month's time. I probably had around 50 calls, I would guess. And yeah, so I spent, a full, I mean, my days were booked. I had, 3, 4 calls, networking calls a day, from Monday to Friday for like 3 weeks to a month time. And then kind of after that, that's kind of when I started really applying to places a lot. And I'd probably say late February. So kind of with that process, I'd say I probably applied to, I don't know, close to 100 jobs, maybe ballpark. Um, and then once I kind of started getting asked for some interviews, that's when I really stepped on the gas and, really started preparing as much as possible. I knew my behavioral doc front and back. I knew my technicals very well. So yeah, it was, like I said, scheduled out 9 to midnight on the weekdays, and then on the weekends I'd probably spend 5 hours during the day on both Saturday and Sunday. So I was definitely working extremely hard for it, and there's definitely times where I was starting to lose some faith a little bit, but I definitely stuck with it, and here I am today. So yeah.
Yeah. So much good stuff there. I just want to kind of highlight a couple of things for people, right? Because having worked with so many students, I think we start to kind of recognize some patterns in students who are successful with the recruiting process versus students who are not. Like a lot of people think it's like, oh, where you go to school and like what's your GPA and how many connections you have, and like yes, all of that stuff matters. And like obviously if you go to a target school, it's easier than going to a non-target school. If you have a higher GPA, it's better than having a lower GPA. Yes, all true. But that's like the very basic, obvious stuff. But I'm talking more like in terms of personal qualities. Like one common thing that we see in all the most successful students with recruiting is that right when they come into the process, regardless, like whether they're freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors, like right when they start the process, they know that there's a level of there's like a sense of urgency that's required. So like the fact that you talked about how you came in and then like the first month your focus was just like getting through the entire program as quickly as you can. um that's usually like a really good leading indicator, to be honest, of like, hey, whether someone's going to be successful or not, right? Like even early on, before you had any interviews, before you did anything else, is like that's one of the things that we look for. We've also had students that, believe it or not, come in, like pay all this money, come in the program, and then like 5 months in, they've watched like less than 5 hours worth of the trainings and modules, like literally, right? And it's just like
Wow.
nothing's gonna happen if you approach it that way, right? And so like that's the first thing, is like sense of urgency. I think is really, really important in recruiting. And then the second thing is like in terms of like how much time you spent on recruiting, it's like it's very clear from what you described that you made recruiting your first priority, right? It was like,
Oh yeah.
yes, I had school, and I needed to dedicate like a certain amount of time to that. It was like 30 hours a week. But then
Mhm.
aside from that, it sounded like all the rest of your time, pretty much, all the rest of your waking hours went to something that was contributing to helping you get this job. Whether it's like doing the search for an internship, whether it's like doing networking calls, sending out emails, talking to people, like applying to jobs, like prepping for interviews, like that, like recruiting honestly becomes like this all-consuming thing almost, right? And
Mhm. Yeah.
um a lot of people, like I said earlier, when I was talking about like how it was such a grind for you, like a lot of people are just not down for the grind. Like
Mhm.
everybody wants to like make a lot of money when they graduate, but like they don't
Mhm.
want to do the work that it takes to actually get there. And it's like I always
Mhm.
tell people, it's like, hey, the average investment banking analyst, I mean, even at a smaller bank, is probably making double what the average college grad is making right out of college today. If you're at like
Yeah.
a big bank, you might be making like triple, or like depending on the place, like sometimes you can make almost 4x. And it's like,
Mhm.
that is not normal. Right. And
Right. Right.
everybody wants to make double or triple or quadruple what their friends are making, but like, are you willing to work double or triple or 4x harder than your friends are
Yeah.
working right now? And the answer for most people
Oh,
will be no. Right. And so,
yeah.
we talk about this concept of like time blocking in the program where it really comes, I'm sure like you had to be really, really, you had to get really good at time management if you weren't already good at it before. And
Yeah.
this concept of time blocking is like, we have our students block time off on the calendar for all the things that they have to do throughout the day. And sometimes we ask them to like show us their calendar. Where like people say like, oh, like I'm like, hey, how come you're not doing the work? So, oh, I'm so busy, I don't have time. And I'm like, okay, can you show us your calendar? Like, what have you been spending time on? And it'll be like, oh, I go to the gym for 3 hours a day, Monday through Saturday. And like I play intramural soccer, 5 hours a week. PlayStation 5 hours a week. Like these are all real examples of actual things that I've seen on people's calendars before. And I'm just like, look, like I just found like 20 hours a week for you by removing this, this, and this, right? And at the end of the day,
Mhm.
what I want people to realize, the people that are like listening to this, is like we all have a finite amount of the same amount of time, actually. In fact, like you
Mhm.
and the people that you're competing against for these jobs, you all have 24 hours in a day, 168 hours in a week. And it's like a very limited and scarce resource. And how you when we say we don't have time for something, what we're saying is not that we actually have less time than the next person. What we're saying is just that that thing that we don't have time for is something that's not important enough to make the cut. Like when I start allocating my
Mhm.
time, like these top 5 things filled out my 24 hours in a day, and then including sleep, obviously, but like you gotta sleep, right? But like after
Yeah.
that, everything else below this line, like it didn't make the cut. Right. And then so like, are
Mhm.
you gonna put getting a job above that line or below that line? Is getting a job going to be more important or less important than like you becoming super buff and going to the gym 3 hours a day? Or
Mhm.
is it going to be more important or less important than like you playing soccer or you meeting up with your buddies for a beer or whatever? I'm not saying don't do those things, but I'm saying like there's a time and place for everything. And like when you're going through recruiting season, honestly, I tell people it's like, I heard this term recently from someone I really look up to and who's really successful. And he calls it like the season of no, which is like when you're like just you go through a small period of time, whether it's weeks or months or whatever. For you in this case, it was like, a 3.5 month period where you probably had to say no to a lot of things. Like you just had to like
Mhm.
put your head down and make sacrifices and just like, no, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that, I'm not hanging out with my friends, I'm not doing anything except for school and getting a job. And then like
Mhm.
after I, achieve my goal, then I can go back to doing like all these other things I would normally want to do. But it's like, but it's a temporary like period of sacrifice that ends up paying
Mhm.
dividends for the rest of your career, right? And so it's like when you think about that trade-off, it's like, are you able to delay gratification, and or like, are you or is this just not that important? And you got to have fun right now, and then you're gonna not make time for the things that really matter, right? So I think like
Mhm.
that, like what you just demonstrated in your example of like, hey, like I mean, you were basically doing 15-hour days between school and recruiting Monday through Friday, and then you're doing another 5 hours a day on Saturday and Sunday. That's 85 hours a week, which is
Mhm. Yeah.
ironically probably around how much you're going to be working when you're in banking. Right.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Exactly.
so like anyway, I just
I
want to like highlight that for the people that listen because I don't think like people understand. I think a lot of college students don't understand just the magnitude of one, how important it is when we're talking about your career, because like you guys haven't worked before. But as someone who's a lot older, I can tell right now, like there are very few things that are more important than like having a really, really good career. Like it trickles down and it impacts every other aspect of your life, right? Your family life,
Mhm.
your personal life, your relationships, everything, right? Your ability to provide for people that you love and care about, like your quality of life. It affects everything, right? And then so the magnitude of the importance of this, and then also like just the amount of work that has to go into something like that if you truly want to be exceptional, you want to be extraordinary, you want to
Mhm.
be more successful than your peers. It's like which everyone says they want, but it's like, are you willing to put in the work for it, right?
Yeah.
I think you were going to
Yeah.
say something. I didn't mean to cut you off, but
No, no worries. Yeah, I was just gonna bring up, I love that you brought up the point. I'm glad you talked about, the season of no, because that's been the past 3 months for me, obviously. I'm definitely a people person, love hanging out with friends, and grabbing drinks and whatnot. But the last 3 months was, I was grinding on, recruiting, and I did have to say no. And as tough as it was at the time, I was, looking forward to, once I finally got that offer, and I can be the yes man after that, and hang out with friends and do all this stuff, before I work. So the last 3 months were definitely a grind, and there was a lot of no's for sure. But since the offer was, just 3 days ago, since then I've been, hanging out with friends all day, and the next month I'm going to be doing all this stuff with friends before I start working. So.
yeah, and it's like, and I always tell people too, is like, look, if they're your real friends, they will understand, right? Like
Mhm,
your real
mhm.
friends are not gonna like stop being your friend just because you had to go into the season of no for a few months for something that's very
Yep.
important to you. Or if they don't understand, then to be honest, you probably need to reevaluate your friendship with them anyway, because then like they're not really your
Yeah,
real friends, right? So it's
yeah.
like a lot of times people feel bad about saying no and whatever. It's like that's actually like one of the most important things that you have to learn to do. Just you
Mhm.
gotta do what's best for yourself, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
um
definitely.
I guess I feel like we talked a lot about like kind of like mindset and approach, and obviously like you exhibited a lot of the qualities that we see in a lot of other successful candidates. Like I said, um, from like a more tactical perspective, um, what do you feel like were like the things that in the program that kind of like made the biggest impact for you, or like a lot of times people kind of talk people kind of ask us like, hey, what's so different about what I would do in a program with you guys versus like if I were just to try to do this on my own? Like, isn't everything kind of just the same? Like all the information is the same. Everything you're gonna teach me is just like all the same information that I could just find online anyway, right? So like what what was your experience like, and like what were there certain things that you feel like made a big difference for you, or like certain things that you feel like, hey, if I had tried to do this on my own, like it definitely would not have been the same? And if so, like what were those things?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, like I've talked about, up until this point, I definitely wouldn't be where I am today without the program. So, I think the first thing, specific to the interview process was, I think the behavioral doc, was great, and having that go back and forth with the coaches to really nail down all these different questions. I think that was great. And then, after I got the final draft, really just, practice these all the time. And then obviously the technical questions and the modules were super helpful. And pretty much all my technical interviews after they got done, I heard, wow, Jack, well, that was, some of the best technical answers, I've heard, which is something you don't usually hear because, there's a right and wrong answer for technical questions. But I learned how to, efficiently and effectively talk about these technical concepts and things like that.
Hmm.
And then also, I think with the Slack channel, I feel like throughout the process, you kind of learn how to talk like a banker and think like a banker, and those things definitely come up in interviews. And also the interview question database was also super helpful. I kid you not, I don't think I got a single question in an interview that I wasn't prepared for, and that
Mm,
that obviously works with the behavioral data doc, but I went through I went through probably, hundreds of interview questions from the database, and practiced them. I read them and then gave the answer out loud after that. And there's just obviously, the common questions you get, but also when you practice questions in the database, you're preparing for questions that are similar to the ones you're going to get. And so I remember one of the brain teasers I got was, how do you value a tree? And this is obviously something that comes up in, a few interviews, and something I've seen a few times on the interview questions database. And I spat out an answer, and the guy after was just like, "Whoa, yeah, yeah, that's good. I guess that's how I would value a tree too." Like that's just one of those. That's one of those things where if I didn't have the program, I'd be stumped in the air. I don't know how to value a tree. Just things like that. But I think, and then also, in terms of networking, I think you instill a great mindset, and just kind of how to do it. And then the email templates, those worked great. I thought, if I were to receive that email, as a banker, I'd say, that's a great email. I'll respond to this kid and hop on a call with this kid.
mm,
So I think the program is just, very well rounded. It really preps you for networking calls and interviews, and it's just very, very, it covers all the bases in my eyes. So yeah,
yeah.
if I was doing everything by myself, wouldn't be the I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't have had great interviews and stuff like that. So
That's awesome, man. I mean, I think you kind of touched on all the different aspects of it. It's like the way we think about it, you need to have relevant experience on your resume, which you worked on as soon as you
hmm
came in. Even though you didn't have much coming
hmm
in, you worked on that as soon as you came in. Talked about networking. I mean, those two things combined determine whether you get the interview or not. And then like
yeah.
once you get the interviews, you have to be good at behavioral interviews. You got to be good at technical interviews. And if you can do like those four things, you kind of
hmm
check all the boxes of what they're looking for in a candidate, right? And so like
yeah.
when you really kind of like simplify things, like those are the only four things that matter, right? And
Yeah.
obviously like the actual execution of it, there's a lot more that goes into it. There's a lot of hard work that you have
Yeah.
to put in. It is a grind, and there's just a lot of little nuanced things that I think most people wouldn't even think about if they were trying to figure this out on their own. But everything matters, even around the margins, because we're talking
hmm
about something that's so selective and so competitive, that if your competition is making, small little mistakes here and there, and you're not, like those mistakes kind of
hmm
stack up, and then they end up making a
Yeah.
difference. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly. Yeah. That's definitely a great point.
That's awesome, and I'm glad too. Like the interview database, interview question database. Like I think the way that you used it is kind of exactly how we envision it. Is like
hmm
basically at this point. I mean, I don't even know like the firm that, because to be honest, the firm that you interview with, I'm guessing we probably didn't really have an entry in the database for that firm specifically, right?
Correct.
But what we did have is we have interview questions from like pretty much
hmm
all the big household names that you've heard of, like all the bulge bracket, all the elite boutiques, all the top middle market banks. Basically, like if our students have interviewed there, they'll add all the questions that they got into this database. And I think like in a way, it's like if you knew you could answer those questions from all the top banks, like you're gonna be prepared to answer questions from pretty much anywhere, right?
Yeah. That
And
that's
so
exactly, how I looked at it for sure. Because obviously there are, middle market, banks on the database, and if I was, answering these questions from, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, these questions on the database, I was, feeling pretty confident about my, upcoming interviews for these smaller banks for sure.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so like it's like also, I think the biggest thing I like about the interview question database is that like it's actual real questions that we're seeing today, right? Because
Hmm.
more and more what we're seeing is like, if you're still just only practicing with the questions in like the very popular interview guides that are out there, like the 400 questions guide,
Hmm.
the same guides everyone else is using, there's nothing wrong with those
Hmm.
guides aside from the fact that everyone's reading them, and all of your interviews have also read those guides, and they know everyone's reading them. So like they're now having to make the interview questions harder because they can't just
Hmm.
ask the questions in those guides that they know everyone's already reading, right? And
Yep,
so
exactly.
by practicing with like actual real questions from real interviews that are happening in real time now, you're actually getting a better it's a closer proxy for what you're actually going to get in a real interview, right? And the
Yeah.
degree of difficulty is closer to what you're going to be getting in a real interview. So I think that's important too. um I guess last question for you, because I think we've already covered a lot of really, really good stuff. But what's like the best piece of advice that you have for, say, someone who's like maybe just now listening to this and they're in a similar boat as you, that maybe you were in like 6 months ago or whatever, where hey, they're a senior, they realize they wanted to do investment banking really, really late, and maybe they've even been doing a bunch of stuff on their own, and doesn't really seem to be working very well. Like, was there one thing that you figured out along the way that you feel like made a really big difference for you? Or perhaps it's like a piece of advice that someone gave you at some point along the way that just like was a game changer for you? Like anything like that that you want to kind of just pass down to other people to help them out?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, the first thing that kind of comes to me is, especially, if you're a senior, coming into the program, or, you're late in the game, you just have to realize that, nothing's going to be handed to you. You're at a disadvantage because you're so late in the game. And, I think like I touched on this earlier, but I think it really boils down to, two things. And that's work ethic and how much you want it. You have to be able to, put in the work. Like I said, I was spending crazy hours on recruiting, and I definitely just, it requires great work ethic. And why, like, how much do you want it? Why do you want to get into banking? What's your true reason? I think these are very important to, remember, because, nothing's going to be handed to you. You have the resources through the program, but, you have to, put in the work, and, really, really just, do your best to, put in the work and stand out as a candidate. And then, I also think networking is just a huge portion of the recruiting process. And this was something that, I wasn't really doing that well during the first semester of my senior year. And obviously the offer that I got a few days ago was from networking. I mean, I wouldn't. They didn't even post a job opening. I mean, I wouldn't have had this offer if it wasn't for this guy I networked with a couple months back. But yeah, kind of also see some other things I want to touch on are, expect to know. This plays along with, networking, reaching out to people, interviews, hearing back from interviews. You're going to get countless no's, but it all comes down to the one yes you're finally going to get.
Mm.
There's this, in terms of networking, I even like played a little game with myself for networking. I remember there was this one small firm, and they had about like 20 people working there, and most of them went to my school. And I sent out, emails asking to hop on a call, and I wasn't getting the same conversion rate that I was getting for my other emails, and didn't get responses. So I ended up emailing actually every single person in the bank, just to see if anyone would respond, and no one did. But it's that you're gonna get a lot of no's, and so expect that, and you got to roll with the punches. It's gonna make that yes feel so much better. And then finally, one more thing. I think it's great if you can build a relationship with your search fund MDs. I had great relationships with mine, and they actually helped me do some networking. And then before my super days, I actually hopped on a call with one of our MDs, and I, for 30 minutes, asked him just these small kind of questions about the deal. I mean, I had pretty good experience with the deal we're working on, but I, talked to him about, why this is like this and why that's like that, really
Mhm.
kind of dove into specifics on the deal. And then, 3 days later during the super days, we pretty much talked about the deal for 3 hours straight. So, I think it's great to, build a relationship with your with those guys for sure. So yeah, it's pretty
That's
much, all the advice I've got at this point.
damn. I asked you for one piece of good advice and you gave me like five. So that's awesome. So there's a few things I want to kind of recap and highlight for people based on what you just said, because I thought there were so many good just nuggets in there. But I think like obviously look, work ethic, how much you want it, that stuff is like self-explanatory. And I think they go hand in hand. It's just like the more you want
Mhm,
something, the more you really want something, the harder you're going to be willing to work for it. Right. So that's why like, yeah, getting
mhm,
clear on your reason why is really, really important. And to be honest, like I would say, hey, if you're a senior, if you're super late to the process, your process is going to be harder. And so
mhm.
like your desire to get into banking has to also be higher. Otherwise, it's
Yeah.
like not worth it, right? And so if you're kind of
Mhm,
like wishy-washy, like someone would ask this question like, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it for you to break into banking? If your answer is like 7, or even 8 or below, like it might not be worth it, to be honest. Like you might want to like save yourself some
mhm,
time and just like, go find something easier, right? But that's
mhm,
number one. But the second thing is like the networking piece where like you said this job wasn't even posted, right?
mhm,
That's going to be especially true if you are a senior coming into the process
mhm,
late, because you're coming into the process so late. Like all the big banks, all the bold bracket banks, all the elite boutiques, all the middle markets, like a lot of the middle market banks, they're done hiring already, right? Like they typically
mhm,
finish hiring at like the very beginning of senior year, around like August,
mhm.
September-ish. And
Yeah.
then so when you're targeting these like, lower middle market or even regional boutiques, like a lot of them don't have structured recruiting processes. They don't have like
Mhm.
a job posted on their website that you can just go and like apply to. It's like if you
Right.
don't network with them, you won't even know that they have a position. And a lot of times you
Mhm,
do network with them and they won't have a position. Then that's
mhm,
related to your other point, which is like you're gonna get a lot of no's, but a lot of people get no's and then they get like discouraged. And I think that it comes down to like having the right expectations, right? Like I think people
yeah.
that come in with expectations like, oh, I'm gonna like apply to 10 jobs and I'm gonna get like 8 of them to respond, and then like, 5 of them are gonna give me offers. It's like, no, you're probably gonna apply to like 100 jobs and maybe like 10 of them might respond, and then you might get like one or
Mhm.
two offers, right? Like
Yep,
and maybe
yep.
even worse than that. But it's like that's why like it's a grind and the sheer amount of work that has to go into like uncovering that one firm that happens to be recruiting. It's like it takes a lot of work. And so
Mhm,
like networking is even more crucial when you're recruiting at this level, this late in the game, with the smaller firms
mhm,
that don't have structured recruiting processes, and like your expectations in terms of how many rejections you're going to get, that needs to be calibrated, and that needs to be like you need to have the proper expectations, and you need to like just know going in, hey, this is going to be hard. But if you actually like are expecting that, then in a way it actually becomes a lot easier, right? Because
yeah.
you're not beating yourself up when, someone says no, or oh, sorry, we already filled our class or whatever. Because like truth of the matter is it is late in the process. A lot of them are going to be done,
Mhm,
right? But there's always going to be some firm that's still hiring. You just have to find them, right?
yeah.
And then the last point was a really good one too, about like having a good relationship with your MD, or just no matter who you're working for, what internships you're doing. Like obviously, always do the best that you can, do a good job for them, maintain a good relationship. But I think like the importance of knowing the deals that you worked on, or knowing like the projects that you put on your resume inside out, is crucial, because you go to these super days or whatever, like they're gonna grill you on those deals. Especially like for you,
Mhm,
you didn't have much relevant experience coming in, and then you do the search for internship, and that like easily became by far your most relevant experience on your resume.
yeah,
And so it's
yeah.
like my guess is like every interview, usually like if the interview is gonna grow you on a resume, they're gonna pick one experience to grow you on. They're not gonna grow you on everything. And then the one experience that they're gonna
Mhm,
pick is usually gonna be the most relevant experience that you have, right? And so
yep.
like you know what's coming already, and you know what to expect. And you have to like study that deal like you're studying for an exam, basically,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think what you did is really smart of like getting on a call with your MD and talking to him and like making sure you really understood like all the intricacies of the deal. And I think
Hmm.
I also heard students before that try to do that with their bosses, and their bosses just like didn't want to help them at all, or it was like, oh no, you can't talk about that at all. It's like this is all confidential, whatever, right? It's like, and I think a
Hmm.
lot of that comes down to like the relationship that you have with your
Yeah.
boss
Hmm.
and whether they're willing to help you or not, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's exactly right. Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
there's like
I
so much goodness of what you just said. Sorry, like not to cut you off, but um there's just so much good advice there. It's like I want to make sure that people are really getting the key takeaways that I
Mhm.
got at least is like if you're a senior, you're listening to this, everything that Jack just said, like so important. It's gonna help you a ton, right? What were you gonna say though?
Yeah, I was just gonna, restate how, the importance is for, really, I mean, the thing was with the search fund, I actually had, a couple offers for the search fund, and the one I ended up, accepting, I just really felt that, there were guys that, I could, get along with really well and ultimately build great relationships. I talked to them about how I wanted to get into, IB, and this was kind of a stepping stone for that. And so they knew, why I was getting into, the internship and, my hopes and aspirations after that. And so, I kept them updated throughout my whole process. And, like I said, they helped with networking, and, they were super happy about, talking through the deal. And, I had the pleasure to, hopped on a call with them the other day and then told them I got the offer on Friday, and they were super happy about it. So yeah, that's definitely super important to do that for sure.
That's awesome, man. That's so great to hear. Um, cool. So, I mean, that was my last question for you, but I think, for people in our audience who are still listening to this, like, guys, if you find yourself in a similar situation, maybe you start late to recruiting, maybe you go to a non-target school, you don't have a lot of help as on campus, or maybe there are resources on campus, but they're only available to younger students, like whatever the case may be. If you have the desire and the level of commitment to do what it takes to get into banking, if you're willing to put yourself through the grind and you know your why and your reason for why you want to do banking is strong, and all you're looking for is like that guidance and the support to make sure that you're doing the right things, to remove all the guesswork. Obviously, because like we can't do the work for you, but like you want to like be efficient with your time, and there's a sense of urgency there, and you want to make sure that you're doing everything the best way possible on the very, very first try so that you can actually get an offer, even though you're starting late, then I want to encourage you to reach out to our team and, book a call with us. We'll hop on, we'll talk about your situation, the same process that Jack went through. We'll ask you about, what you've already done today, what's working well, what's not working well, what's your goal, what do you feel like you still need help with? And like based on what you tell us, because it's not a one size fits all approach, right? But like based on what you tell us, we'll either map out like what we think is going to be the best game plan for someone in your situation, which we can then help you implement if that's what you want to do, or at a minimum, if we don't mutually feel like it's a good fit, which happens sometimes, then at a minimum, we'll just give you some advice on what we think you could do on your own. And so either way, like this could be a very, very valuable call for you and just help you make some progress that you wouldn't have been able to make otherwise on your own. All right. So if you want to have this call, you can go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. Again, the streets abbreviated to wallstmastermind.com/apply. And we look forward to talking to you and hopefully helping you. All right. So with that said, we're right about out of time. So Jack, I want to thank you again for spending the hour with us, talking about your experience. Um, Obviously, you're a super hard worker and you deserve all the success that's coming your way. And I'm really excited for you. And just look forward to, continue to track and follow your career and see what you accomplish going forward. And obviously, like we were talking about before, we hopped on here, like, you're always going to be part of the Wall Street Mastermind family. And, we look forward to just staying in touch. And also, like, if there's anything else that you ever need help with, you know how to find us. Don't be a stranger. Right. Um, so yeah, man, thanks for letting us play a small
Yeah.
part in this journey, and just big congrats again to you.
Thanks so much, Sam. Yeah, I'm definitely happy to hop on the call with you and give some more insights. So it was awesome talking with you today for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thank you for doing that. So, guys, we're gonna wrap it up here. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll be back with more of these for you guys in the near future. And until next time, all right.